Hello and welcome to this webinar demo on Invoice Approvals. It's one of Nolan Business Solutions GP modules that we've created that works in tandem with eRequest. Is Campbell McLeish. I'm the Sales and Marketing Manager at Nolan Business Solutions. Today the demonstration will be given by Joe Pryor, who's one of our consultants at Nolan Business Solutions. And Angela Barnes also joins us on the call today, who is our Client Account Manager for our Microsoft Dynamics GP customers at Nolan's. So without further ado, I'm just going to pass over to Joe to take you through the demonstration. Over to you, Joe. Many thanks.
Hello and welcome to this demonstration of Nolan Business Solutions eRequest Invoice Approvals module. Today I'm going to be running through the entire end-to-end process of the module, both in eRequest and in GP. Along the way I'm going to be using specific approval routes to illustrate my points, and I'll be paying particular attention to various new features in the product itself. So we're going to begin by looking at approving purchase order invoices in the payables module. These are invoices that have been matched to existing POs. Then we'll then look at approving payables invoices. These are ad hoc standalone invoices that are not matched to purchase orders. We'll also have a look at the drag and drop document attach and some of the benefits involved in that. We'll then look at how to work with accruals for revenue recognition for when there's a delay between receiving invoices and the approval process in eRequest. And then finally, we'll have a look at the document viewer portal, which is quite a useful tool for non-GP and for non-eRequest users to allow them to access documents within both applications. Okay, so just to illustrate the invoice approvals, I've set up a fairly basic IT services invoice approval route, which we can see on the spreadsheet. So at the bottom of the tier of the hierarchy, if you like, is a group called IT Services, of which Catherine is the sole member. The next group up in the hierarchy would be the IT Managers group, of which Mark and Vikas are both members. And then finally, it would be the IT Directors group, Colin Smith. Now, if we look at the approval limits, Catherine's got an approval limit of 100, which means she would be responsible for approving any invoices up to the value of 100. Mark and Vikas for anything up to 10,000. Anything greater than 10,000, it would be Colin, the IT Director. Now, when we're sending invoices from GP to these approval groups within eRequest, we can do it a couple of ways. We can either send everything to a default group, which typically would be the group at the bottom of the hierarchy. So Catherine would, in the initial stages, receive all the invoices from GP. She would then either approve if her approval limit allows her to, or she would submit them up through the various tiers in the chain. So that's one way of doing it. So everything starts at the bottom and works its way up and finds its natural level in terms of the invoice amount. Or if we wish, we can bypass the particular groups and send it directly to the group that we know that is responsible for final approval. So if it was an invoice we were entering in GP for £20,000, then just knowing our structure as we do, we know that really the group we want to be sending it to is the IT Directors group and to Colin. So if we wish, we can bypass Catherine, Mark and Vikas and just go straight to Colin. Okay, so there's a bit of flexibility, which we'll see when we go into Dynamics GP. Okay, so let's have a look at the invoice approval setup in GP. I've set up a couple of approval rules. Most of the invoice approvals module is driven by these rules. Okay, so the first rule is IT services. And if we look at this rule, the criteria, if I could go into account ranges, this rule is going to look for all invoice transactions where the distribution segment of category begins 000. So basically any invoice in the system where the purchasing distribution line begins 000 will pick up IT services. Okay, and the approval users and groups against that rule, so these are the people or the groups in eRequest who potentially could be the approvers. as you can see, I've created 3 groups: IT services, IT managers, and IT directors, which mirrors the Excel spreadsheet we looked at recently. So we've got the 3 groups, and I've set the IT services group as being the default. So that means that any invoice that gets entered in GP, when we go to the eRequest approval screen, it will automatically point it to the first group in that hierarchy, IT services. But as I said previously, the other 2 groups are available if we want to repoint to those groups. Okay, so the second approval rule is almost identical, IT maintenance. This is for ad hoc invoices, the only difference being that the account range this time has got a category going from 400. So anything that begins with 400 in the purchasing distribution line will pick up the IT maintenance approval rule. And again, the approval users and groups, the structure is exactly the same with the 3 IT groups. Okay, so let's look at entering invoices into GP in the purchasing module. I've got a purchase order that I've already created for a creditor called AB Services. Now, this is an order for 100 phones at £28 each. Now, assuming that we receive those goods, we can record the fact by going to our receiving and invoicing. So this screen lists all the POs for AB Services. The one that I'm interested in is PO 12, and I can see my 100 phones at 28.46. So we'll receive them. Okay, so it's asking me to enter serial numbers, which I'll do automatically. Okay, right, so when we get to this receivings entry screen, this is where we start entering details of the supplier invoice. So I'll enter my invoice number, and I'll put it in a batch called October invoices. Okay, and if I have a look at the distributions against this this transaction, I can see it begins 000. So because of that, I know that it should now go and pick up the IT services approval rule. And I can check that by going to additional eRequest approval. And if I look at the eRequest invoice approval screen, the approval rule ID is IT services. That's exactly what I would expect. It said it's going to require approval before the invoice is posted. There is also the option, if we wish, to have the eRequest approval process kick in before the invoice is actually being paid as opposed to posted, but we'll leave it as posted at the moment. It's going to say required approval by IT services group. Now, the reason that the IT services group has defaulted there is because of that default that we set up on the approval rule. Now, as I said, we can repoint these groups if we wish. So I can go into this lookup, and I've got the option of those 3 groups. So looking at the amount of the invoice, 2,800, that tells me that I know that it's really the IT managers group who have the approval limit in order to approve this invoice. So I could just repoint it directly to managers, but I want to show the whole flow. So I'm going to leave it with IT services for the time being. So we'll say OK to that. The next thing we might want to do is attach the invoice document to the transaction. So when this detail gets sent off to eRequest, in this case to Catherine, Catherine will see all the details I've entered on the screen, but she'll also have the invoice document to compare against. And the way we do that is we go into our document attachment screen, save the record. Now, this is just the standard GP document attachment screen, which you may have seen before. This area here is the eRequest drag and drop. Now, what drag and drop does is, as its name suggests, it allows you to virtually just take a document. It could be from a folder location, or it could be directly from an email. So, for example, if I want to take this document here, I can just pick it up and drop it directly into the box, saving a lot of time having to navigate through various folder structures. Now, where the drag and drop is also particularly useful is when documents are received via email, and they can be picked up directly from the email message. So if I go to my email, I don't have to download that file and save it somewhere in a folder or on a network and then grab it from there. I can simply lift it directly off the email and just drop it straight into the document attachment window. All right, so we've now got two documents attached. I'll remove this one for the moment because that's just a sample. We'll get rid of that. And that invoice is now ready to be viewed both by GP users in GP and by the eRequest approvers. So we click on preview. And it shows the AB services invoice. Okay, so that's now been attached to the transaction. So when I click on save, I've done everything I need to do to help the eRequest approvers. So I've matched the invoice to the PO. I've checked to make sure that it's going in the right direction, so it's going to the correct group. And I've also attached the document via document attachment. Okay, so I'm going to click on save, and that's the GP part of the process completed. Okay, so we've sent off a purchasing invoice to Catherine in eRequest. Before we log into eRequest, Catherine will receive an automated email from eRequest, and we just have a quick look at that. So it tells us that invoice RCT10 is awaiting her approval, and it's got some instructions to log into eRequest and approve the invoices as soon as possible. Now, this email message is fairly standard, but just to let you know that these emails can be tailored to individual customers' requirements. So it may be that you want the link that will take them directly to eRequest via the email, or maybe there's some sort of special text or some special message that you want to be included in that email. So just be aware that the emails are customizable. Okay, so Catherine has received her email. She's now going to action that invoice request. So we go into eRequest, and I'll log in as Catherine. I'll go to the Invoice Approvals option on the menu. Now, when Catherine logs in, she gets to see all the invoice approvals that are currently outstanding. So that's her invoice approvals view. We're interested in RCT 010. So when she clicks on that option, it's going to show all the details of the invoice that's just been entered in GP. She gets to see all the distributions, the control accounts. She also gets to view the invoice. So if she clicks on View Invoice, opens up the invoice, she again gets to see that document, which she can use as part of her approval or rejection. So when Catherine checks through it, and if she's happy with everything that she's seeing, she will then click on the Approve button in order to, in this case, she won't be able to finally approve because of the approval limit. She can only approve up to 100, but what she will do is she'll be able to submit it to the next group in the chain, which is the IT managers group. So when she clicks on Approve, she gets presented with this approval or rejection note. Now, for approvals, it's not mandatory, but we can enter a message which will be viewable by all the authorizers in the chain. So we can put a message that just says, Catherine submitted for other approval. And we'll say OK to that. So now we get a message that says invoice has been submitted for further approval to the IT managers group, which is exactly what we'd expect. So we'll say OK to that. So Catherine has sent off her invoice to be submitted to the IT managers group. And as we know, the IT managers group contains Mark and Vikas. So because they're both members, they both received the same email that Catherine was sent with all the same details. Now, again, the way that we've configured here is that because it's a group with more than one member, we can define it to say that we only need one approver, only one user has to approve the invoice. So the invoice will appear in both Mark's inbox and Vicas's, but it would be a case of whoever gets there first and approves it will be responsible for the final approval. So we'll log in as Mark for the moment. And we'll go to his invoice approvals. And there's our receipt 10. And just as before, Mark obviously will get to see all the same information that Catherine saw previously. He can also view the invoice. He can also see any notes. So he can see Catherine's notes from the previous stage. And again, if Mark's happy with what he sees, he can click on the approve button and do the final approval. Again, he can enter a message if he wishes. Okay, final approval for funds. And he'll say, okay. So the message that pops up this time is it says that the invoice approval has been completed, which again is exactly what we would expect, because there's no need for it to be submitted any further up the hierarchy. Okay, so Mark's approved his invoice. Now, what happens in GP is that transaction will be taken out of its original batch and it will be moved into an unposted batch called approve, which we can look at here. Okay, so receipt 10. So we can see that this transaction, the batch ID has changed to approved. When we look at the notes, we can see the potted history of everything that's happened so far in the approval route. So we've got Catherine's stage, and then we've got Mark's stage with all the notes. If we have a quick look in the eRequest approval screen, we can see the status is now approved, which again, as we'd expect, because it's gone through the eRequest approval process. And this batch for this transaction is now ready to be posted directly into the GL. So if we click on post, to go to a batch, okay. Okay, so that's our posting journal with all the distribution details as well. Okay, so that's the end-to-end process. So that batch has now been posted. We've matched the invoice to a PO. We've taken it all the way through eRequest, and we've finally posted into the GL. Okay, so next we'll look at a payables transaction. So the process for payables invoices is similar to purchasing. So we go into transaction entry, and you've probably seen this screen before. So we just enter the transaction as we would normally. So again, we'll call it October invoices for our batch. We'll give a description, server maintenance. We'll use our AdTech supplier this time. We'll give it the document number, and we'll give it an amount of £12,000. Okay, so when we look at the distributions for this transaction, this time the purchasing line begins with 400. So based on those approval rules we looked at previously, this should pick up the IT maintenance approval rule. So I'll click on OK, and the first thing I want to do is to check that it's picking up the correct rule, which is IT maintenance. Now, again, because IT services is the default, we'd set against that rule. That's why that appears in the require approval by. But this time round, rather than having it go through all the different levels, I know that because it's a fairly high value of 12,000, it's going to go to IT directors. So this time I'm going to select IT directors group. I'm going to repoint it, and I'm going to say OK. So that means that this invoice, once we send it off to eRequest, will appear in Colin's inbox. And again, as before, we can attach a document. This is just a message saying that it already has a purchase order outstanding, but that's fine. We'll say continue, and we'll just add a document from the folder. Yeah, this one here. And we'll say OK to that. We'll save the document. Again, continue. Okay, so before we open up eRequest, we'll just have a look to see that Colin has received his email, and it's saying that voucher 531 is awaiting for approval. So again, Colin would act upon that email. We'll log into eRequest. As Colin. So we can see the voucher 531. And just as before, Colin gets to see all the details from GP. He can view the invoice and so on. Now this time, rather than approve it, I'm going to reject this invoice because I just want to show you how we handle rejected invoices. So let's assume that that's the wrong document that's been attached. So Colin will click on reject, and this time he has to enter a rejection note. We've set the rejection note to be mandatory because that's going to help the GP users when they become aware of the fact that this has been rejected. So Colin will enter a message saying wrong document has been attached. And we'll say OK to that. So that's now gone from his awaiting approval list and has gone back to GP. Now, the way in which the GP users become aware of the rejections is that we set up smart lists, one of which is the Invoices Rejected smart list. So eRequest Payables, Invoices Rejected. So when I go in there, I can see that this is a list of everything that's currently in a status of rejected. So voucher 531 by Colin, wrong document attached. So if I'm the GP user, I'll be checking the smart list probably on a daily basis. I can see that this one needs to be actioned. So I go to voucher 531 by just clicking on the link. Again, just double check the notes. Yep, wrong document attached. And if I have a quick look at my eRequest approval, I can see that the status is at the moment rejected. Okay, so let's put the correct attachment there. So if we delete that, and if we go back to our email attachment, and we'll use this one. So we'll drop that in there, and we'll say OK. And then we go back into our eRequest approval screen, and then we can resubmit it back up the chain back to Colin. So again, it's going to default back to IT services, but I'm going to change that to IT directors. I want it to go to Colin. Say OK, save, continue that. So that should now be sent back to Colin. Back in, we'll just refresh that. And voucher 531 is back in. So this time round, Colin's happy with the invoice that he's seeing, and he'll approve this time. So invoice approval completed. Say OK to that. Back into GP, and just as with the purchasing module, it's going to create a separate approved batch, but within the payables module. So if I go to batches, approved, and I can see my transactions there, one of which should be Colin's. Yep, 31. Yeah, so that's the £12,000. And again, we can see the plotted history with all the notes. And again, just as before, this batch is now ready to be posted in GP. Before we move on to the next item, I just want to have a look at the smart lists that come as part of invoice approvals. The smart lists are handy for GP users who are not necessarily eRequest users. and it allows them to monitor the progress of all invoices that are currently either in the GP system or in eRequest. So if I just go through a few of them, so payables approved. Now what this is a list of all the payables invoices that are currently gone through the eRequest system and are sitting in a batch called approved. So that just tells you all those transactions that are waiting to be posted by the purchasing ledger team. Okay, next would be invoices to be approved, which essentially means all those invoices that are currently sitting in eRequest waiting to be approved. Now, this is quite useful for purchasing teams when they want to chase up. So they can order these smart lists by date, and if they think something's been sat in eRequest for too long, then they can send follow-up emails and phone calls and so on just to chase up the progress. And then the rejected smart list we looked at before will give a list of all the smart lists that are currently in a state of rejection. So smart lists are very useful ways for the finance teams and the GP users to monitor the progress of all the invoices. Okay, so next we'll look at working with invoice accruals for revenue recognition purposes. Now, there may be a scenario where an invoice is received from a supplier in a particular financial month or period. And obviously, because of the time it takes for the approval and eRequest, it may be that that invoice is not finally posted until the next period. So we want to recognize the fact that the invoice has been received in a particular month. Now, the way that we do that is there is a routine called Invoice Accruals. If I open up that screen. Now, what it's going to do is, as you can see, it's going to find all the transactions in the system that have currently been entered. It gives us the option of creating a batch, which then will automatically create a GL journal unposted containing all of those details. It will give an automatic accrual date of the last day of the current period and then a reversing day of the next period. So if we see this in action, if I go to batch ID, I'm going to call it October accruals. I can see that it's going to post into this accrual account and it's going to pick up one payables transactions, add tech. The distribution mask here, it's going to give a distribution reference which will be accrual followed by voucher number, in this case voucher 531. So when I process the routine, it says one GL journal transaction has been created. Okay, that's what I expect because there's one transaction there. And if I go into my GL, you can have a look for that batch and have a look. So it's October accruals. I'll just go back one. And I can see my accrual for voucher 531 as expected. Now, the thing to point out here is that this is a reversing type journal and it's got the dates as we saw previously, 31st of the 10th with the reversing date of the 1st of November. So it's quite a fast and efficient way of automatically creating this GL journal, and it also allows us to recognize the fact that particular revenue has been recognized in that month. Okay. Okay, so next we'll look at the document attachment viewer. This is a new piece of software that's recently been developed, and it's a pretty useful tool in that it allows non-GP users or non-eRequest users access to some of the transaction details and the document attachments within both applications. So the way it works is we enter the URL and then we log into the website. We use our search criteria and we can search by a company, transaction type, whether it's payables or purchasing. It could be vendor, document number, transaction number, or dates. So for my search, I'm going to search in the Nolan Business Solutions company for all transactions within the month of October. So I click on search and it retrieves all of those transactions. And that list, the column headers, they can be filtered by each one of those columns. And if I want to view the document against any transaction, I just click on the the link and it will open up the document. So I can actually see the invoice against that document. So as I say, very useful and efficient tool for external access to the eRequest documents.
Thank you very much, Joe, for your time, and thank you very much for you for attending. If you have any questions or you'd like to find out some more information about either eRequest, Invoice Approvals, or any of our other Nolan Business Solution products or services, please do get in contact. You can give us a ring on 01252 811 663, or give us an email, sales@nolanbusinesssolutions.com, and one of the team will pick up and get back to you. Or visit the website, which is www.nolanbusinesssolutions.com, where you can find out more information, as well as watch other videos, case studies, and data sheets on our modules that we offer and our services. So again, many thanks for your time, and hopefully speak to you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.